So, Guilty Gear Strive beta just came out. Got my hands on it from testing it out at majors. A lot of people have been asking me what I think about it. This is going to come from more of an X and Core plus R perspective, but here we go. So when I think of Guilty Gear, there's one word that comes to mind more than anything else, and that's style. This game series is just dripping and oozing with style ever since its conception. Guilty Gear Missing Link, though a hot mess, was so incredibly cool. Character design, the moves, the art, the music, the story, and endings, all so great. There's some major problems with Missing Link, but hey, they put a lot of art into the game. When people think of art, they think of things like the look of the video game, Guilty Gear's metal aesthetic, its metal music, and even its metal storyline. But what people tend to miss with video games as art is that they're art in the gameplay as well. We aren't watching a video, we aren't listening to music, we aren't reading a novel. It's a game that enthralls us and puts all of those pieces together. We struggle, we learn, we overcome challenges, and that struggle is the art that a game can convey. This medium of video games, it's its own art form. When it comes to Guilty Gear, all of that aesthetic was part of the package, but the art of the gameplay is what drew me to the game more than anything else. It gave you an incredible amount of options and freedom to express yourself. The game isn't about how well you can play as Soul, or play as Slayer, or as Biken, it was how well you can play. The game series has such an expression of yourself that you can pull up a mirror match in black and white with no names on it and tell within 5 seconds who is playing as who. Fab picking Potemkin and Mike Z picking Potemkin are two very different characters. Both do incredibly well in tournaments, both approach the game and their character in different ways, and neither are wrong. Slash Gordon, a plus R Eno player, probably said it best. Really though, you need to fight extensively at least 2 different players of the same character so you can learn the matchup. Guilty Gear has so many ways to express yourself that fighting a really good player a whole lot won't prepare you for fights against other players with that same character. When it comes to analyzing the style for Guilty Gear Strive, the character model aesthetics are cool and the music is good from what I've heard of it, but it feels like they're forgetting the most important art of a video game, the art and creativity of game design. Every character seems like a mold that the player has to find some way to jam themselves into. The Gatling combos are stiff and restrictive, the player options and choices are limited to exactly what the developers want them to do. It's not an art of expressing yourself creatively through the game, it ends up becoming about optimizing the specific features they want you to use. Then once a player fits that mold, the game starts to get very boring. Fighting games tend to have a unique hook, something that tries to distinguish itself from other games out there so it can stand out in the crowd. Sometimes this works well, sometimes it works poorly, but a fighting game without a hook never really works. Third Strike's parry, Street Fighter 4's ultras and focus attacks, Dead or Alive's holds, Marvel vs. Capcom 2's 3v3s, and so on. It feels like everything new about Strive is something that limits the player more. Whether it's the Gatlings or the wall crushes, Guilty Gear Strive has nothing unique to it that would make me want to play it over Xrd. At its core concepts, Guilty Gear Strive tries to limit decision-making, stifle creativity, and streamline the player to walk the path towards exactly what the developers want them to. Fitting a mold isn't artistic, fitting a mold isn't metal, fitting a mold isn't Guilty Gear. Many people think of fighting games as rock, paper, scissors. You can attack, block, or throw, and each beats the other in a circular loop. I've always hated this analogy. Timing can make attacks, throws, and blocks more effective. Attacks can beat other attacks. Jumping can beat throws. Overhead attacks might be more successful against blocks, but can be riskier to do, and so on. The concept of how many options you actually have at your disposal during an interaction is a term called dimension. When you add more dimension to a fighting game, it becomes less a one-dimensional game of rock, paper, scissors, and more of a battle where you have to weigh multiple options based on how successful they can be versus the options your opponent is going to use. In Guilty Gear Plus R, you have an incredible amount of dimension at your fingertips. Unthrowable attacks, instant blocking and strings, double jump baiting landings, invincible backdashes, a meter that you have to use to block ground-to-air moves, instant air throws, etc. The concept isn't lost to just those interactions either. Different states of the game make you have to weigh more options. When you're knocked down and waking up, you can still gain the advantage. Invincible reversals, invincible backdashes, you can throw your opponent before you're in a hittable state, and all of these is on top of different wake-up times for each character. These decisions are something both the attacker and defender have to worry about, which makes the constant push-pull of a fighting game always apparent, even when you have an advantage because of something like a knockdown. Many of these concepts are lost in Guilty Gear Strive. In an effort to try and get more players to either enter the series or just watch the game on stream, the developers have removed many key functions of Dimension in the game. There's no form of teching in Strive. No air techs, no ground techs, not even a tech roll. You might see rolls, but the game does these automatically for you. Instead, all recovery decision making is now absent. This is different from first frame techs that become more popular in anime fighting games lately, but isn't in +R. With first frame button hold attack, you can still decide to do it late. When a game doesn't even give you the decision for when you can recover, then you, the person on defense, have lost control. This is not a benefit for the player on defense. This is part of the whole design philosophy with Strive. They feel that Okizeme, the metagame for when a player is recovering or locked down in some form, is a detriment to the game. This is a beginner's trap when making fighting games. Board control in a fighter has multiple states of interaction, and attempting to control the advantage or break out of your opponent's control is a very important part of the fight beyond simply dealing damage. It gives a player an alternative goal for a win condition. Control the fight, control your opponent, don't just go for a single confirm. With the reduction of the offense versus defense game, the developers have removed a lot of defensive options. In +R, having a large amount of defensive options is what gave you, the player in defense, control over the match. They've removed instant blocking as a means to regain control during a block string, and they've also removed a high-risk, high-reward defensive option, which in +R was Slashback and Rev 2 was Blitzshield, without replacing it with something new. One of the most critical tools in Guilty Gear was the Faultless Defense. It prevents chip damage, pushes your opponent further back, halts momentum, and allows for you to block moves in the air, all at the expense of some meter. Strive has decided to remove one of these tools, the air blocking usage requirement. I can't say I'm much of a fan of this decision. Being in the air is generally more advantageous. It lets you chicken block, fewer ground moves are able to reach you, and you can attack overhead. However, for this advantage, you are mostly completely defenseless unless blocking air-to-air moves. Faultless Defending removes that risk, but at a pretty strong meter cost when using it to block moves in the air. Now you gain that advantage without the disadvantage to couple it with. Since the meter usage for air blocking is now unnecessary, it also greatly reduces all of the different reasons for using meter. In +R, you can see whole games go on where people are spending all of their meter, regaining it back, then spending it again, all without using any overdrives. Meter was such an important resource, it was the lifeblood of your character. Now there's no 25% option for meter. It's just overdrives, Roman cancels, defensive Roman cancels, and faultless defense. No force breaks, no blitz shields, no necessary air faultless defending, no FRCs, and, I can't believe I'm saying this, even no YRCs. It feels more like a Street Fighter 2, where you've built up enough meter to now do your big damage move, whether it's a super or Roman cancel, take your pick. Reducing options like this gives the players less control, not more control. Less control means less dimension, fewer unique interactions, and ultimately, less depth for players to try to use. A shallow game doesn't keep players interested for long, it stifles creativity and makes the game more boring to watch as you start to see the same things happen over and over. This isn't the way to draw in players, and most of all, this isn't Guilty Gear. All of these contribute to the concept of dimension, but there's also a key concept in fighting game design called flow. This concept is where you let your players continue to play while they watch or deal with the situations in the game. For example, a cinematic cutscene will be a break to the game's flow, but an NPC shouting orders on a battlefield while you continue to fight would incorporate those elements without interrupting flow. Breaks in a game's flow are fine, as long as they're done the right way. Maybe you finish a boss fight and are now shown a cinematic cutscene, or you have a spot where the action is slowed down and you get to a save point. But these interruptions need to happen at appropriate times. Think of a scenario where you're playing a shooter, gunning down enemies, when in the middle of the action, a cinematic cutscene occurs showing a spaceship landing and many more enemies start pouring out. Then once the cutscene's over, you're in the exact same spot, fighting the same enemies you were just interrupted from. It takes a moment for your mind to get back to where you were, and at that point, you could get shot or miss a critical option that you could have taken. This is an interruption in flow. This flow interruption is 100 times worse in a PvP game. In fighting games, you can think of the game as a dance between you and your opponent, but where both of you are trying to take the lead. There's a constant struggle to control the game's pace. The options I'd listed earlier help both players take that pace and try to turn it into their favor, but sometimes there's external factors that can halt that flow. And I mean really external factors. Someone might have their controller synced and accidentally pause the game. The monitor could short out and flicker off for a second or two, or your controller buttons might stop working. These obviously aren't the game's fault, but even if your opponent waits for things to get set back up to continue playing, the pace and momentum of the round is completely halted. Guilty Gear Strive feels like it's adding these external factors into the game intentionally. Wall breaks reset the positioning and make it so players can't use their controls for a set period of time, cutting all momentum. Roman cancels slow down time for both players, making you have to switch thinking to a different timescale in order to confirm. Counter hits create an obnoxious massive text that looks designed to distract you while time is slowed down. These are terrible for pacing, but they're good for one thing: esports readability. Someone who has never played Strive and will never play Strive can tell, ooh, that counter's a very bad thing. I should be excited over that. All these interruptions feel like they're designed not for the player, but for people watching the players. The game is effectively yelling at everyone, saying, "Look at me!" Now, if I were a cynical person, I would say that the majority of Strive's design choices were made not for the player, but for the spectator. If I were cynical, I would say that the ridiculous high damage is supposed to convey excitement to the spectators at what was going on. That the hit counter growing and taking up 2/3 of the screen was for the spectator to think that that number was very important, and that the massive counter text is supposed to snap the spectator to attention and get their eyes peeled to the game. If I were cynical, I would say that the UI, having the life bars take up less of the screen and having the portraits tracked to show exactly where your health is at, while being inconspicuous at the same time, was not a game design decision, but an esports visibility decision. Having two of the most important indicators, burst and risk, relocated to a tiny footnote barely visible to anyone who doesn't know where to look, would be a good idea if you don't want to confuse the spectator who might not even notice them. It would be a very cynical point of view to take that they would be making all these decisions not for plays, but for views. All I can say is, I'm not a cynical person, and I hope that that's not the reason why they decided to make all of these choices. We'll see if I'm right. So, those are my gripes about Strive so far. The game is still in beta, so they could change any number of these concerns of mine, and I hope they do. I really do love Guilty Gear. I don't want Strive to be a bad game, but many of these intentional decisions they've made are very misguided, in my opinion. With that said, here's some other things I noticed that don't really affect the core points I was talking about, but are just weird decisions that I disagree with. Throws are on D now instead of H. What's up with that? I also have a whiff animation. I thought they were going to make it so that your 5D was your whiff, kind of like how in +R your whiff is really you doing a 6H and probably getting counter hit. But no, if you do a normal dust attack, but you're holding forward or back, now it's a throw whiff. It's going to be weird to deal with when trying to do dust attacks. Gatlings are gone now, or something. The punch kick / heavy / progression is pretty much gone at least. I don't even really know how combos work now, and honestly that's probably going to be a problem for new players getting into the game trying to make their own combos. What are their rules for what Gatlings into what? It's not that obvious, I guess. Maybe I'm missing something for it. I don't know. This kind of ties into the do what we want you to do mentality instead of try to come up with cool stuff on your own mentality. Holy cow, air dashing is weird. I understand the way it is now will let you do certain things, but it's such a huge change and I don't really know why they would do it. You can actually attack faster during an air dash now than you could have before, it seems. So it's not really something that would prevent fast overhead mix-ups. It's just weird and I don't get why they needed to do it this way. Heart icons? Really? The only other games that have backwards win markers like this are ones where your health bars carry over between rounds, like in Vampire Savior. Strive doesn't do that, so I don't get why they decided to go that route. Also, couldn't you have done something more metal than hearts? I mean, virtually anything could have been more metal than heart icons. Roman cancels are actually strike attacks now. Like, you have to hit your opponent with a Roman cancel or something for it to fully work. I don't know why they did this, it just doesn't seem to make sense. I'm not really complaining about it, to be honest, I just don't get why they decided to do this. Anyways, with all this being said, I did want Strive to be a good game. I love Guilty Gear, and started it back when X2 came out for PS2. I've been playing fighting games since way back in Street Fighter 2 at my local 7-Eleven. I've wrapped myself in the genre ever since, and have played so many fighters since, eventually managing an arcade and running tons of tournaments. Though I love fighting games, nothing has quite captured me like Guilty Gear has. This series means the world to me, and it really is sad to see them stray this much. Hopefully they take the route of King of Fighters 12 and end up updating the game into something really damn good. But I don't see it happening with this first version. If you want to see more Guilty Gear+R stuff, check out my stream or more of the videos here on the YouTube channel. I typically stream at 9 p.m. Pacific most days. Hopefully I'll see you around. This isn't really a +R video, but I do run the +R Discord server, so if you're interested in getting into +R, come check out the server. I'll leave a link for it in the description.